Well, good evening, everybody. I've had a lot of conversation. Oh, by the way, I'm Robert Buxton, and I'm very sorry I missed last month. I had a conflict on Saturday, and I got some emails from people, so I hope you weren't thinking I was going to come, but at any rate, I'm back and should be following this regular once-a-month schedule, or schedule, depending on how you... Yeah, actually, some people... I had a history teacher in high school, he said, schedule. He had this very serious way, like Tom Brokaw. So, I thought he was from the Midwest. He sounded like, but it turned out he was from New Jersey. It was strange. So, tell me, if you would, please give me a few notes, musical notes, because I'm going to make up some. I've been doing more improvisation. Not been doing more, but been talking about it with people, and they're curious about it. Improvisation. Wow, I thought classical music, as all music, is deeply connected to improvisation, and so maybe I shouldn't put myself on the spot like this, but it's too late. So I have this old receipt here. If you just give me a few musical notes, give me a note, any note.
C, D, E flat.
Oh, well, okay, so we have C, D, and E flat. Thanks. How about a couple more, maybe? Anybody?
Do you like flats more than
Anything. Anything.
D flat?
D flat, all right. So we have C, D, E flat, D flat. Okay, you throw a wrench in there, but that's fine. One or two more. This could be interesting. A. Like from Canada. A. A. Okay. C, D, E flat, D flat. Okay, how about we stick to those?
Okay.
Any stylistic requests?
WC.
A little, okay, Debussy, because you have a connection with Debussy, so does it have to all be Debussy? Yeah, let's try it. Let's see. So early Debussy, that is.
Yeah, well, this is wonderful.
So we have here the wait, I have to put it here. C, D, E flat, D flat, A. Okay, well, that's interesting. So tried to do a little Debussy, some of Debussy's things. Well, thank you. That means a lot coming from you. Because, all right, well, now let's do the real program. So thank you. You made it up, and then I did a little bit with it. I'm going to play, I have some new things from last time because it was 2 months. Usually in 1 month, I don't have enough new stuff, and I'm always a little guilty coming to you, but I'm a little less guilty today. I'm going to start, well, it's a lot of French music, oddly enough, today. The first piece is by a composer named Gossec, Gossec, who was an 18th century French composer.
Yeah.
And we don't hear that much of Gossec's music, at least in the US and nowadays. He's a great composer. He wrote many symphonies, and but especially operas. And this opera, this is a gavotte from the opera Rosine, it's from the late 1700s, right before the French Revolution. And by the way, Gossec, he lived a very long life, unlike his contemporaries like Mozart, who knew him, by the way. Whenever he'd go to Paris, Mozart would see Gossec and respected his music. So this gavotte, the opera Rosine, is from right before the French Revolution. And to me, it really captures that world of Versailles, pre-French Revolution, the powdered wigs and everything. That whole thing. And that world was soon to be gone, for better or worse. But it was, you'll see what I mean. It's not, yeah. So gavatte's a dance. The French or let's say they need to have dances in their operas. It's just like in North Carolina, many people need to have Texas Pete with their barbecue. It's just one of those things. That's the best maybe comparison I can think of. Can you imagine Wagner having dances? Yeah, but the funny thing, I read this, that when Wagner's operas came to the Paris Opera, when he was there himself in his time, the French choreographers or whatever, they put in dances. And Wagner, you could imagine, was not thrilled with that, but it just, c'est nécessaire. Yeah, so this gavotte by Gossec, it's played a lot as a standalone piece. I'm still doing my program with violin or violin-related arrangements, and so violinists play this a lot. This gavotte, it's very comical in a way. It's very funny because it has what I think sounds like a hiccup in it. See what I mean? Right there. And it just keeps coming back. So here's the gavotte by Gossec. It's arranged by a fellow whose last name was Bass or Bass, either like the fish or the instrument. I don't know. I don't know much about the arranger, but it's a very 19th century-like arrangement with thick chords, and it's nice, I like it. But originally from the opera, generally played on violin or other instruments. So gavotte by Gossec. Here's another French piece, but from about 100 years in the future, in the late 1800s. I think I've done this piece before here. This is, and forgive my French pronunciation, you can correct it as Après un rêve, After a Dream, by Gabriel Fauré. And it's After a Dream by Fauré, who, I think I've done this here. It's a vocal piece originally, played on violin, cello, everyone does it. And this is a solo piano version by Percy Granger, who was a strange fellow, an Australian composer. I'll tell you more about him. But Fauré is sort of like, I don't know what people would classify him as. I think to some degree classifying music's a hard business, but maybe, to me, he reminds me of Impressionist painters. Debussy, actually, for me, seems to sit a little later than Impressionists. Like, I associate Fauré more with Monet and Renoir, and Debussy more with some later painters, because, so, it just has that characteristic French sophistication, and I always use this analogy that these effects here, it's like in French cooking, sauce, heavy butter in the sauce. So anyway, so I'll play the piece and go from there. This is After a Dream by Fauré. I really had this experience, and you maybe have had it too, where you're half awake, half asleep. And in the 19th century, dreams became something of fascination for people like Freud. You maybe went a little too far with it, but it's just that state of half conscious, half awake. We had our smoke detector malfunction a few weeks ago, and it kept going off every hour, starting at like 3 a.m. And so I experienced this piece. Except it was more of a panic, but still. Have you ever been to Paris? You know those lights on the Seine, along the Seine River?
Yes.
To me, that's a little bit what that's like. I don't know why. There's nice photographs of that too. So now another arrangement by Percy Grainger, the Australian guy. This is, I've also done this here before. This is the famous Londonderry air, Oh Danny Boy, and it's done on the violin a lot. It's sung, obviously. There's also a gospel song with different words called He Looked Beyond My Faults, but it's the same tune. The Danny Boy text is probably a father, well, yeah, tomorrow's Father's Day, by the way. Good connection, not planned. But it's probably a father speaking to his son who's going off to fight in the First World War. Tell you about Percy Grainger, who did the last arrangement of Fauré and this one I'm about to do. So he was very strange. I won't tell you all the details, but he liked, for example, when he would travel by ship, he would beg the crew of the ship to allow him to shovel coal in the boiler room. He liked physical labor. He was also into backpacking. You know many classical people like this? Probably not. But in a way, I like it. He would backpack in his early days from one concert to another in Australia. I don't know when he practiced, but he would show up 10 minutes before, put down his camping knapsack down. I guess he wasn't showered, and he would just start playing. I mean, interesting, quirky fellow. And there's some other interesting quirks, and maybe, well, I don't even want to get into them, but he was a very bizarre, maybe not the best person, but really, I mean it. I mean, you'll see what I mean if you read about it. But here is his arrangement of the Londonderry air, Oh Danny Boy. piece, well, they're all sort of short today, not really. This is Rachmaninoff Daisies, or Margaritki. It's a song that he wrote in 1916, and shortly after he arranged it for solo piano himself. 1916, of course, was the year right before the Russian Revolution. And Rachmaninoff and his family, they got out for that. And it's interesting, he had an aristocratic lineage, but he didn't really enjoy any privilege growing up. I read that his father gambled away the family money when he was quite young. So, but you know, it was not a good situation after the revolution for him. And he never returned to Russia. And he was plagued with homesickness. Now I think, maybe speculating too much, but I think that he had maybe what we would now call clinical depression, maybe. You read his diaries, he was very moody a lot and brooding. His photographs, he never smiled really, he was always very gruff. I've probably told you a million times that story of my grandfather, yeah. So, anyway, but I think that, so here's the thing about Rachmaninoff, his nostalgia for Russia is a famous thing. But I also think he was nostalgic for something even when he was still in Russia. What I mean is, this piece, I think that it's his nostalgia for the summer times that he spent in the countryside with his grandmother. Because those were maybe the happiest times of his life in his diaries and letters. So anyway, that's what I think this is about, this piece, Daisies, by Rachmaninoff. Water. Oh, I put it here. I always forget what. So now I'm going to do a Paganini list arrangement, which I've done. I think I've done 1 through 5 at some point for points here, but I finally got to number 6, the last of them. So this one I've definitely not played for you.
Okay.
But I do have to tell the same story to give you the background on it a little bit. So Paganini was this very, well, to me, he was like a rock star or a heavy metal person or something who came to the context of the very first piece I played, the Gusek. Because he was born in the late 18th century, lived into the 19th century, and was really shocking and controversial. in his time. I think he still is. But there were people who thought he was possessed. I mean, he wasn't, but there were some people who they thought he was so, wild, the way he played violin, even the way he looked. He may have had Marfan's syndrome, which Rachmaninoff also, I read recently, may have had. Rachmaninoff was very tall, he had big hands, but he had a lot of aches and pains, and those are symptoms of Marfan's. But that's not for me to speculate. What I mean is Paganini had this very striking look as well. There are drawings of him. He had this thin, wiry, long hair and this chin that stuck out, and he played violin in this crazy way. And for this reason, he was a big inspiration to the Romantics who came. He came in the age of reason, age of enlightenment, and he was very much not a Rousseau or Voltaire-like fellow. He was this. So the Romantics who came a little later, they adored him, and Beethoven, because both were just iconoclasts. So Liszt heard Paganini at a particularly low point in his life. Liszt was sort of depressed. He was in Paris, which I don't know how you can really be depressed there, but that's beside the point. People are. There was one writer, I don't know, it's like Henry Miller or somebody, and he said, "I miss Paris so much. Of course, I was so miserable when I was there, but, those were the great." So, but anyway, Liszt was sort of stuck. He had fallen in love with someone and it didn't work. His father, Adam, died, and he was very close to becoming a priest, and this urge came up several times during his life. But then he heard Paganini perform, and that was it. The rest is history. Then he went to practice like mad, and for a few years. And in this period, he arranged a lot of Paganini for the piano. Now, this violin project I'm doing, I keep finding more repertoire, or let's just be honest, more reasons to keep pretending to be a violinist, because I just keep finding more and more stuff. Not stuff, it's music. And like, for example, Paganini, maybe Liszt was the first to arrange Paganini, but then Schumann did, which I have to learn it. So Brahms did, Rachmaninoff, the Rhapsody on a theme of Paganini. So this Paganini became this big inspiration for all the Romantics. This is Liszt and Busoni. I'm playing Ferruccio Busoni. I love to say it because it sounds like I can speak Italian. Ferruccio Busoni. So this is Busoni's version of Liszt's version of Paganini. And it's the original piece is the 24th Caprice for solo violin. It's probably the most famous Paganini piece, theme and variations. And you've probably heard this before. That's sort of the original idea. First with Liszt, and then furthermore Busoni do with it is something very different from the original solo violin piece. But just a note about arrangements, because people ask me a lot, what is this arrangement? And it's like, well, okay, on the one hand, if you read books that are translated, that's the same idea. Another way to think of it is in the old days, the so-called classical musicians, they were less purist than we are now. And what I mean is, I heard that Mahler, when he conducted Mozart, for example, he would rewrite Mozart, he would reorchestrate to his own liking. Now today we hear that, we think that's sacrilege. Maybe it is, but in a way, but I think it's fascinating that you can hear Mahler's version of Mozart and the original Mozart. It's just very interesting. And there's people now who are taking this approach back, because I think it's the less, quote, purist idea, because really we don't know how they sounded back then. We just don't, because we don't have time machines. So anyway, here is Paganini, Liszt, Busoni, 24th Caprice. was so controversial. Yes, back in those days too. Here's another violin arrangement, of course, that I haven't done here before. This is just something I swore I would never do, and then I'm doing it. So, the Swiss-French pianist Alfred Cortot, who played this, he did his own solo piano arrangement of César Franck's Violin Sonata, the famous A major violin sonata by Franck. So, just a small point, the Franck Sonata, it's not Frank Sinatra. It sounds a little like yeah. It's Ron's Father's Day. Yes, I'm a dad, and what happens when you're a dad is you start corny humor just flows through you. It's just one of those things. So I've told you this before. If you're a musician, you go to the store. What do you need to take with you? Your Chopin list. And by the way, yeah, it's terrible. But you know, Liszt did some arrangements of Chopin. That's on the list. That's on the to-do list. L-I-S-T. Now, okay. So, what was I going to play? Yeah, the Franck, arranged by Cortot. So, tell me about this sonata and César Franck. César Franck was a very interesting and great musician. He was an organist, especially, and lived in the late 19th century. He had these glorious mutton chops, like a lot of them had. You know, he was sort of the opposite of Mozart in some way, in that he wrote his masterpieces really from his late 60s into his 70s. And he was most prolific then. He wrote the D minor, the symphony, and the prelude, chorale, and fugue for piano, all in his later years, and this sonata too, which incidentally was a wedding present for Eugene Izay, the great Belgian violinist, also Belgian. So Franck, born in Belgium, but he spent most of his life in Paris, and he was the organist at one of those big, was it Saint-Sulpice? Saint-Sulpice? Maybe. I have to look that up, sorry. But he was...
Symphony.
Was it what?
The three minor organ symphony.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah,
That's so... Is that Franck telling us? No, that's the wrong term. I'm just kidding. Yeah. So, but the story of this sonata, it's a little bit. I mean, the Fauré piece I played, it's a similar style. That maybe those two composers are in a similar vein. I mean, they're different, obviously, but similar timing. In Marcel Proust, in the first novel from the set, La Recherche du Temps Perdu, the Swan's Way. If you remember, there's a fictional composer, a fictional violin sonata. The name starts with a V. I think it's Vinteuil, I can't say, but it's a fictional violin sonata. And it just keeps showing up in that novel. It's like a symbolic thing. It's such a beautiful sonata, and many people say that this Proust's fictional sonata is based on the Franck. It probably is. And here's something else to think about, that the way Proust writes is similar to the way Franck's music goes. Because in Proust, you don't have a regular narrative, like a plot, you know, with the development of characters and all that. Proust, it's like these long memories, flashbacks, associations, and like in some movies they have the flashback scenes, you know, the dream scene. I call this the flashback violin sonata because that's what it's like. It's like this stream of consciousness, at least the first movement, very much so. And I'm just going to do the first movement now. Why? Because it's hard. I haven't finished all the other movements, so that's the reason. So here it is, the first movement of the César Franck violin sonata in A major. Never knew I would play this on the piano solo. Played it with a wonderful violinist recently too, so. All right. So, and there's more. There's 3 more movements. And I thought that's crazy. Play that piece on solo piano. Well, why not? I can pretend to play both parts. And there's just so many great recordings. Makes me feel guilty to even play it because you have Cortot and Jacques Thibault who played it many times. It was a 1923 scratchy recording. It's incredible. Then there's David Oistrakh and Sviatoslav Richter playing. I mean, it's one after another, and it's such an iconic piece. But there's something interesting about it being on solo piano, I think. I always say that when you have an arrangement, it's a new piece. I'm not trying to be the violin, it's a reimagined. So here's another arrangement. I really don't know who did it, maybe the composer himself. This is the very famous Meditation from Thais by Massenet. I was looking for a piano version and couldn't find one for a long time, and then somehow just found it online. You can find anything online. I mean, on Amazon or on whatever. And so the opera Thais by Massenet it's not done very much. I hear it's hard to sing. I know that Renee Fleming did it not too long ago. So the story takes place in Alexandria, Egypt, at the end of the Roman Empire. And Thais is she worships the Greco-Roman gods and goddesses. Okay, so a very early Christian monk tries to convert her, and because it's an opera, of course, he falls in love with her in the process. It's an opera, so you have to have that. And this famous meditation from Thais, it's not sung. It's an interlude that comes at different points in the opera with a solo violin and orchestra. And it's just this iconic piece that's played. The violinists have taken it out of the opera and just played it as a standalone piece. It's a famous thing. So, and I'm going to just play it in this solo piano version. Hope you like it. French music today. Oh. Yeah. All right, sorry. French is good. French music is good. French food and French wine. It's good. French bread. Yeah, getting hungry, right? I didn't have dinner yet, so. Yeah. So anyway, I'm stalling. Okay, here it is. story about that. I learned it some time ago, between the last time and I came here. And I was playing it somewhere else, I won't say where. And a nice lady came to me and said, you know, on second thought, it's really much better on the violin. Yeah. And I said, well, thank you for coming. And she meant well, and she was leaving, and then she turned around and looked at me, and she said, you should do more Chopin. But you know, actually, I tell you, Chopin, I love Chopin's music, and there are some things I have planned to learn of Chopin, but I find that Chopin is like, what's the word I'm looking for? I find it very awkward to play, just to capture the spirit of Chopin, and I don't think I'm very good at it. So, you know, I stick to this, that's maybe why, but at any rate, let's see the time. I am going to play a little gospel, Southern gospel. I know if classical's not your cup of tea, well then you have this. So maybe one more Paganini piece, which I've done here before. You know, I think we like the thrill of the roller coaster like Paganini. I'm going to do his infamous La Campanella, with the with the bell sounds. And I had another image for it recently when we had the cicadas, right? You remember the buzzing, because you know it's like that. Well, they're all gone, but there's something to remember them by. Poor guys. All right. La Campanella, Paganini, Liszt, and Busoni. of water, and then I have to sort of flip a switch in my head, do a little Southern gospel. Okay, speaking of flipping a switch, okay, there we go. That doesn't open. That's a very important thing, because I told you I'm originally from New Jersey, and everyone said when you move, well, I lived in Texas for a while too, you drink water, or else. And I found out once I didn't drink enough water when it was hot, and you might say, well, why are you wearing this jacket? This is the lightest, a very lightweight thing. It's even, I feel even cooler in this than in a t-shirt, so, but you still have to drink water. You could sleep in it, it's not, anyway, so, no, I wouldn't do that. So, here is, I'm going to play a little Southern gospel. I don't sing, of course, sorry. So the hymns all have very interesting stories behind them. And I'm going to do a version of, with some improv of What a Friend We Have in Jesus. And it may not be exactly how you would do it on a Sunday morning exactly. Well, it depends. But the story behind this hymn is a great story that Joseph Scriven, who wrote it, lived in Canada at the time, in the 19th century, late 19th century. And his mother at the time was living in Ireland. And in those days, it's not as if you could just FaceTime or whatever, Skype, Zoom. It wasn't. So he wrote the song, the poem, to comfort her at that time. And that story, adds to the meaning of it, I think. So here it is. close with a combination of two old-time gospel upbeat things. I want to end this on an upbeat note. And this is the first is a Southern gospel version, of course, of When the Saints Go Marching In. And then I'm going to segue into a crazy version of I'll Fly Away. So, talk about When the Saints, because originally it's a spiritual. It's from the dark period of our history of slavery. And it was sung originally very slowly with many verses. And the verses are, I read them all, they're dark and they're apocalyptic. But the way we think of When the Saints Go Marching, what happened was the spiritual came, of course, to New Orleans at the turn of the 20th century, and the New Orleans brass bands played them for funerals. But funerals in New Orleans were and are not today somber or down, they're upbeat and lively, they're celebrations. And this, if you watch Ken Burns, the first episode of Jazz, the documentary, that's where jazz was born, really. And so many other types of music, American music, it's in this, from this melting pot. And the style I'm going for is my absolute favorite musician model for how, for phrasing and everything, it was Mahalia Jackson. And, I mentioned the name Mahalia Jackson. I was playing, I won't say where, and someone laughed in the back. And it really got to me. I thought, how could you laugh at Mahalia Jackson? I went to the car, I realized he thought I said Michael Jackson. And it's a totally different thing. Yeah, because, so to clarify, Mahalia Jackson was this great gospel singer. She was born in New Orleans and lived mostly in Chicago. And she was big friends with Dr. Martin Luther King. He was giving the speech, the I Have a Dream speech. That's her, because he had a prepared speech. And he started with that. And she was getting frustrated. It wasn't, and she yelled at him, Martin, tell him about the dream. And that was, the rest is history. Precious Lord, the great gospel song Thomas Dorsey wrote for her in the 40s, it was Martin Luther King's favorite hymn. She sang it at his funeral. So she was, it goes to show, not only a singer, she was so much more than that. She also published a really good cookbook, which is amazing. So, just like her more and more, the more I find out about her. So, I'm trying to imitate, not imitate, but do it in the style that she would sing it. So, here it is. still light outside, so you can go up. Thank you so much, everyone. Great to see you all.